meeting, direct and prosper our deliberations, for the advancement of your glory and the true welfare of the people of Newcastle. Ladies and gentlemen, will you honour the memory of those who've served and died, that we might meet here in peace? Thank you, councillors. Councillors, do I have any apologies or leave of absence? I have an apology from Councillor Dunn and a request for leave of absence. Are there any further ones? There being none, I'll just ask for a mover. Councillor Clausen, do I have a seconder? Councillor Winnie Bartz, all those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? I declare that motion carried. Councillors, do I have any declarations of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest? I'll just check the chat. No, that looks good.
Lord Mayor, sorry, I hadn't added my name to the chat.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Lord Mayor, could I please declare a less than significant conflict of interest in relation to the fact that my employer, Hunter Water, owns some land at Stockton and has been engaged through the development of this plan. It's a less than significant interest as I haven't been directly involved in any of the conversations or discussions, and so I'll be remaining in the discussion this evening.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Is there any further declarations? There being none, I'll move on. Councillors, the item number 21 tonight for discussion was distributed under separate cover to our iPads. I'll just note and also welcome Joanne Rigby, our Manager of Assets and Projects, and Corinne Jerd, Project Team Leader, Coastal Plan Management. We're up to item 21, so that's the public exhibition of the draft Stockton Coastal Management Program. This also includes a briefing for councillors. So I think it's important, I know staff have been working very hard on this document, that with the run sheet that I have, that we move into a committee, which obviously allows under our code of meeting practice to receive a briefing and also then ask questions when needed. So do I have a motion to move into committee to receive a briefing and also discuss the item? Councillor Mackenzie, was that your hand? Great. Councillor Rufo seconded. Thank you. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? I declare that motion carried. So as we move into committee, I would just again welcome Joanne Rigby, our manager, and also our team leader, Corinne Jerd. And I know that they will be giving the presentation. I know it's a very large document that everybody has received today, but in introducing them to give us a briefing, I can see Joanne has come online, and Corinne, I just wanted councillors to know, and I know some of you over the last couple of years have attended the community liaison group meetings, that the staff have worked exceptionally hard for many years, but over the last couple of months, many hours have gone into the preparation of this draft plan, and obviously attending those meetings and some of the focus group meetings with the community to get to this point. Also knowing we have a truncated timeline as well that was given to us on the 17th of February this year, it has been a huge body of work. So just in introducing Joanne, I'd just like to give you my thanks on behalf of all of the councillors, and also to Corinne and the team. It has been a phenomenal effort to get to where we are today, and a truncated timeline in the middle of it. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over to you to do the briefing now.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you for the kind words. Yes, it has been an extremely speedy timeframe, to say the least, and yeah, June is coming around far too rapidly. If I could have the PowerPoint presentation put up, that would be great. I'm just going to do a quick introduction, and then I'm going to hand you over to Corinne Jerd. So, as you're all aware, coastal erosion and shoreline recession is not a new issue for Stockton. Next slide, please. The sketch from 1949 from our archives identified that there was an old erosion area between Griffith Ave and Hereford Street, and then a new erosion area in the southern section of the beach near Delvey Oval and the holiday park. These are the exact same locations of the current erosion impacts today. Over time, there have been periods where the beach has built up. However, coastal erosion has resulted in the construction of the seawall, the Mitchell Street seawall in the 90s, and then the Surf Life Saving Club seawall by City of Newcastle in 2016. Both were constructed to protect both private and community assets. More recently, erosion has resulted in storm events in 2018, August and September 2019, and then the most recent one earlier this year in February. Following these events, on the 17th of February, the Minister for Local Government issued a direction to complete a CMP for Stockton by the 30th of June. So this is our truncated timeline that we've been working to. Then in March, the Deputy Premier also announced a formation of a task force of community representatives, government agencies, and City of Newcastle to work together to address Stockton's coastal erosion issues. And the task force is being formed to consider options to fund long-term solutions and explore all opportunities for sand sourcing, so including offshore. So with all of this in mind, I'm going to hand you over to Corinne, who's going to run through the development of the Coastal Management Program and how we're proposing adaptive management to address risks, ensure all opportunities can be taken, and ultimately to provide a coastal environment that is protected, enhanced, and resilient. Thank you. Over to you, KJ. Next slide, please.
Thanks very much, Jo. Pardon me. I am going to try to work on that wicked problem with you this evening. I guess from my perspective, a beach is a very changing natural place, foreshore movements, backwards and forwards sand being pushed around by water. However, when you actually squash that beach between a community and all of its requirements, so that it can't migrate anymore, and then you have the continuing forces of the ocean, we end up with a wicked problem indeed. And then you overlay that with multiple layers of agencies, levels of government and land ownership, and you truncate it with a short time frame, it becomes wicked indeed. So our approach to the problem over the last literally 2 months has been to concertina a whole range of activity with one driver in mind, which is the utilisation of mass sand nourishment for the protection. It's the mantra of the community. It's the heart of the matter. And if you like, I'm going to try to skim across the cream of everything that's come to the fore over the last few weeks with the superhuman effort of our team of both staff and consultants, to give you the very best we can of a position for the management of Stockton's coastline. The vision is around protecting, enhancing, making sure we're resilient, not only to provide amenity and protection, but also the sense of identity that we've clearly seen and understand with our Stockton community. So quite an in-depth investigation was undertaken, but I'm hoping I can translate that into some simpler messages in the 20 minutes that we have together. Next. So we'd better very firstly start out with where are we actually talking about. So the Stockton CMP area is shown in the green outline. It basically moves from covers the breakwall to Meredith Street, for those of you who know Stockton. Next, pardon me, next, the whole area from the breakwall to the LGA boundary was expected to be included in the broader Newcastle CMP, which we were on the way to deliver by next December, and the ministerial direction to complete the section of Stockton early on the basis of the erosion history that you've heard from Jo has actually brought us forward to a time frame, thank you, next, of 5 years. So we hope that all the work that we've brought into this Stockton Coastal Management Program today can go through to the Minister. We hope for some certification, and then over the course of the next 18 months, it will all be uplifted into the wider CMP. That and the erosion immediacy is the determinant of that 5-year plan, and it's driven the investment strategy, which we will come to this evening. Next. Not being either a coastal engineer, an engineer, or an expert, it is very challenging to put your mind around the depth and detail that is required to develop both the data and the analysis to enable us to make evidence-based decisions. And I take my hat off to those consultants who are helping us to do this. Bluecoast Consultancy, a group of engineers, were contracted by council to complete a sediment transport study for the whole of the Bight to inform the wider Newcastle CMP, and they have been able to pull out the kernel of the information that we would require to bring this truncated CMP for Stockton forward. We have looked at shoreline recession. We've gone back over data over 35 years. We've brought new data to the studies which weren't incorporated in either the 2006 or the 2014 investigations for Stockton. We've looked at the sort of demands there are for protection around storms, the sea level rise over the period we're managing, and also the hazard lines for the suburb, the peninsula, the associated risks. I guess the take-home message out of all of that analysis is that there's one figure which drives a lot of what is to come, which is our determination of the actual volume of sand that's lost from the Stockton CMP area that we're working with. It's approximately 3 times greater than we previously understood at 112,000 cubic metres annually. We're very confident. We know that there is the loss of sand from our compartments is actually moving north every year. And that figure has, along with all the other analysis, has fed a probabilistic model which has been developed in record time to ensure that the sorts of decisions that we're putting forward and the actions are actually evidence-based. Next. As I said, the heart of the matter is the question around mass nourishment. As, pardon me, I think it's the change in temperature. It's definitely not COVID. As the heart of the matter, we identified the sources of sand which could be brought to bear on this wicked issue. Terrestrial sand, obviously land-based sand from a number of quarries that are available locally, and some other opportunistic sources we've investigated. We also looked at the offshore marine sources of sand. We also looked at the other marine source from in and around the harbour. We have provided those details in the attachment that you have in H. So there's a full treatise on the sand sources for potential nourishment that we looked at. What I need to, I guess, identify, and there's nothing challenging in this, but clearly if you're going to bring in sand from terrestrial land sources, it needs to be trucked generally, and the impacts that has had, we've been through in a small scale trial in just before Christmas in 2019. There's also the issue, obviously, if you're bringing sand in from the offshore zone, then you're going to be dealing with dredging, and there's an image there showing the sort of rainbowing that happens in a number of sites in coastal locations where sand nourishment is part of the protection strategy. And we also have our own small contribution currently relative to what I'm about to tell you from the Port of Newcastle. You can see the David Allen, the local dredge in the background in the slide off Stockton, dumping its 30-odd thousand generally cubic metres per annum, which comes from the marine source at the mouth of the harbour. Our sand losses incorporates the current Port of Newcastle contribution. So obviously without that, we would need another 30,000 more. I think I just wanted to mention, of course, that the marine offshore source has been the topic of great conversation, and it's really heartening to see the task force established. And even more heartening to hear, as we understand it from our stakeholder group of other agencies, that there has been a completion of a literature review by a geological survey of all the extensive offshore data that they have. Whilst the report isn't finished, it's pending, and so we're very hopeful to see something from the task force process in the future, very near future. Thank you. Next. The sand sources, pardon me, the terrestrial, the sourcing that I spoke of has been quite extensive. It was a demand clearly from the community. There's been a lot of issues around, did we look at this and have you looked at that? And I think that the attachments you have will be quite clear that we have been looking at the options for Stockton now for a number of years. And the breakthrough on marine offshore has been extremely heartening, as has some of the other opportunities that I will talk about further through the presentation. Next. This is a fairly scary slide. This is part of the wicked problem. In the process of looking at nourishment sources, which has fed our investigation and assessment, we obviously also need to look at the volumes that would be required. The data we have in the analysis is pivotal in being able to determine what those volumes are in order to deliver the protection strategy that the community and others have advocated. If we move from the top to the bottom of the slide, we looked at a range of sources. So firstly, terrestrial sand, an enormous volume, 4.5 million cubic metres. We would be trucking sand to Stockton on that basis for about 21 years at about 40 loads a day. So it's clearly an enormous volume beyond anything we could source from sand. And it would produce a beach with the expectation was of about 36 metres. And because of the nature of that sand, in other words, because it's coming from a quarry source, really for every cubic metre we get, it effectively ends up on the beach as only a third of a cubic metre. That's based on the size of the grains, because of course all of our quarries are actually old sand dunes. So it's the lighter material that's been blown and then compacted at the quarry face. So that presents an enormous challenge from a volume and in a moment, obviously from a cost perspective. If we were to use marine sources from offshore, there's clearly less material required, but the other great joy in that is that over a 10-year renourishment period, rather than annually as it would be from a land source, to deliver the 112,000 cubic metres annually lost would be 1.1 or thereabouts million in a 10-year window to try and maintain that beach width. And for Hunter River or other marine sources, that volume is much smaller, and that's around the logistics of both the plant and delivery programs, as well as the shortened renourishment period. So you would put a smaller volume on to give you an equivalent to terrestrial, and you would need to come back on a more regular basis. So that basically pulls apart the three major sources of sand. Thank you. Next. And what it brings us to is the first challenge we have with the equating of those sand volumes to what that might cost. So understandably, the terrestrial source is completely out of the park. The marine source is quite interesting from the offshore, both the initial as well as the 10-year window, providing the lowest cost of all of the three sources, with the fact that the Hunter River sources come in smaller campaigns. You end up with a slightly more expensive return, particularly because you have to mobilise your plant more regularly. So when you look at that, thank you, you'll find that when we ran our cost-benefit analysis, thanks, Dan, you'll find that you'll find that the marine offshore opportunity is the one which actually comes through our cost-benefit assessment process with a positive outcome. So that's one down. So marine offshore over a 50-year period based on a campaign to produce about a 35-metre wide beach. It will offer protection, and it will offer, obviously, because of its protection, the amenity people are looking for. Thank you. Next. So whilst that is the case, we know that the terrestrial source is not available. The marine offshore source might give us the best cost-benefit analysis, but it currently is not feasible. We understand the task force role and what we're doing with that space, but we do need to look at what it is that Council can do in the immediate window of time. And so we did continue to look through this assessment process over what might be able to be provided for amenity if in fact sand couldn't be provided for protection to deliver the beach that people are looking for. Thank you. Those sources were assessed. And in this situation, I've just come forward with the actual dollar figures. As you can imagine, the figures are smaller, therefore the volumes are smaller. They represent trying to provide a beach, an improvement over what we currently see. It needs to be understood that none of this investment would actually provide protection from storms. Particularly in the case of the land terrestrial line at the top, that particular investment would actually see us take up nearly 40% of all the quarry license available extraction limit in the area. That brings a whole host of other issues. So it's clearly beyond what we could draw, not only the cost, but also the practicality. And from these suite of opportunities, none of them actually came out of our assessment process as positive. That's mainly due to the fact that the benefits are obviously not there from protection, whilst they are there from amenity, and so the overall benefit is decidedly reduced. Next. From the sand nourishment then for beach amenity, where could we go? So we took our assessment into a lower order level of practicality. So let's have a look at the new word, truckable. So from a council perspective, if terrestrial land-based sand is it's too big to provide amenity, what would be the next lower order alternatives we might be able to assess? Thank you. And on that basis, we went through. Thanks. Oh, I'm so sorry. Can you just flick back one? I was checking the wrong screen. Cheers. And on that basis, we went through pardon me. We went through an analysis of terrestrial-based sources, those that we knew we could get our hands on, and for volumes that would produce, if you like, a status as it is. So the 3A option was an amount of sand in the order of about 20,000 cubic metres. Again, it's quite a sizable proportion of the overall amount available locally. Clearly, the cost figure that would need to be delivered annually to keep that amount of sand on the beach. And then we took another step into a smaller volume at 50,000 cubic metres, which has a price tag of $4 million a year, again, to keep probably not even the width of beach we have today. So it offers no protection as such. It would offer some limited amenity in the short term. And if it were to be the ongoing process, it would need a $4 million annual build to basically keep a beach that would be of a lower amenity than what we currently have today. And again, when you run these options through our cost benefit processes, none of them were positive because the overall benefits couldn't be seen. It's not enough to protect, and it's not enough to maintain an improvement in amenity. Thank you. So on the basis of some fairly poor outcomes for anything outside of mass nourishing, it became absolutely clear that we need, as an organisation and as a community, to be agile and extremely flexible in being able to take sand where opportunities arise. So one of the commitments through this process has been the development of a set of sand management, or a guideline, which will basically pardon me, which will basically mean that whatever opportunity arrives, council has the capacity to actually assess the source and say yes, or potentially say no, so that our sand source opportunities might be widened even in the short term by being able to take on some of the various opportunities that have been provided to us. So that acceptable criteria will be invaluable in the future, and will also serve as an excellent basis for the deliberations of the task force in going forward. Thank you. Immediate risks. So the other wicked part of the problem that we're dealing with is, not only did we conduct all of the sand availability, the cost benefit analysis, all of the documentation one would expect in an assessment of that scale and depth, it also brought forward the risk and hazard identification pardon me, assessments, which you can find in your attachment E. A large body of work which has some very clear messages. Firstly, we know that there are areas of the Stockton coastline which are at immediate risk. I guess anybody who's been to the site can see exactly where that immediate risk is currently playing out. We've been playing Christo art installations through that section of beach. So anywhere where you see the geofabric and the sandbags is basically saying to you, there is an immediate risk here. It is confined to a couple of places. 4 of them are associated with the ends of our existing seawall, the 2 at either end of Mitchell Street and 2 at either end of the Surf Life Saving Club. And the extent of the proposition to be able to address that immediate risk by some buried extensions to the top and to the north and south of those seawalls, to a total extent of about 225 metres, will provide the sort of protection to accommodate for the time lag we understand before we can get mass sand nourishment on board, and also to deal with the ongoing issue around the emergency works and their 90-day window. So trying to secure both reducing the costs and the level of immediacy with response to most events which are currently happening, weather events. Thank you. As I said, we've briefed both the CLG and others recently. This is the extent of the emergency works which we have on site at Stockton at the moment, and a range of these would be brought together under the stage 1 protection works, and obviously the sandbags can be reused. So I guess that is a very tiny sliver of silver lining, that in fact the sandbags could actually be placed back on the beach as sand. Sorry, an aside. Thanks. Next slide. The most confounding of the issues around this problem, though, is what happens outside our 5-year window. What happens if mass sand nourishment isn't brought forward on a protection strategy? Where does it leave us? And we are very clear about the fact a backup plan needs to be identified, or a buried last line of defence, if you like. Buried seawall structures that would only be breached when conditions were met in line with the hazards. We have used the hazard line investigation and risk assessment to actually inform a threshold that's somewhere about 20 metres seaward of the 2025 hazard line. We would need to actually engage that threshold by looking at the implementation and the risk assessment around wherever the particular site might be on Stockton foreshore. We understand that that sort of strategy might be higher risk, that the threshold when reached, we would need to be ready to act. So there are actions in the current CMP that you're considering, which would enable us to be ready with designs, be ready with an assessment of the heads of consideration that would be required at the time. And also we expect this to be at particular sites. Yes, that's the issue around our beyond the 5 years. And I just thought we should point out that if we call them stage 2 set of buried works, then I just noted that obviously because the option 2 where we talked about amenity, sand for amenity, or the option 3s where it was only what sand is available to hold a pattern potentially, those 2 options certainly don't have any line of defence or protection. And when the analysis occurred, those stage 2 works were included there. We clearly understand the community's preference for sand, not seawalls. And again, that has been part of the mantra that we've heard. And so obviously this buried line of defence is a backup. It won't, we are not planning on incorporating this in our current preferred option, because clearly we've made a position that we expect mass nourishment will come from the deliberations which are currently ahead of us within the time period of this CMP. Thank you. So this is a flash in the pan. I thought we might brighten the situation up with one of our corporate colours, because I think we've finally come to a position that we agree is not only viable, it's feasible, and it's acceptable if we use the basis of our Stockton Community Liaison Group feedback as just a litmus test at the moment. What we're looking at is a mix and match, a hybrid. If we understand, and we do, the immediate risks that are at hand, then we would commit to putting sand from land-based sources or from any other permissible source that might arrive that we can move through our guideline for conditional approval, as well as the immediate protection works that are required. So the extensions of our existing seawalls to a minimal extent at their northern and southern boundaries to provide the first year of the plan. And with the expectation that we are going to secure the long-term protection for the Stockton foreshore of offshore marine sourced sand. That would be a 10-year turnaround, the nourishment period outside our planning horizon of 5 years. So what that means for council, thank you, next, is that we have 2 options. The first, which came out of our cost benefit as a positive, was the full gamut of 50 years worth of mass sand nourishment from offshore sources. And we understand we have a time lag in that. And so the second option, which you'll be pleased to hear, is the hybrid mix and match. Let's do the work required immediately, and let's progress and deliver on mass offshore nourishment with state and community partners. That is the only other scenario of 13 that we have run that also came out with a positive outcome from the cost benefit analysis. Thank you. So the indicative actions, it's a very big table, but it's still got quite a positive outlook in terms of colours anyway. This is a compendium of the type of activity that is you can find in the CMP in section 6. So there's quite an extensive table there with a lot of detailed. I've tried to pull them together in like spaces. So a commitment to place either terrestrial or whatever else may be permitted sand sources on the beach at Stockton. Pardon me. And to move in line with that, to establish the immediate protection works. For just for logistics, I've put them across 2 years here, but the total let's just say about 6 million would deliver all of the works that would be required in that first or immediate space of exposure of areas and assets on the Stockton coastline. We would obviously have a range of planning and approvals, community engagement, advocacy, emergency works if they were to arrive, etc., that will need to be committed. And I've tried to gather up those into a collective commitment. I also need to add here that we have also committed through our previous coastal zone management plan to maintain the Mitchell Street seawall, which is a very large task in terms of rock nourishment to bring that structure back to its original design intent. And also includes some work on the current Surf Life Saving Club seawall. And obviously with those works going on, the offer of being able to bring an even better cost structure around the immediate extension, buried seawall extensions to those structures is certainly on offer, as well as delivering on the expected accessway environmental works and other associated activity that we put into the baseline determination. And I know it's small, given the 24 million that is expected in a mass nourishment campaign, but I just wanted to make sure that it was well understood that we will fund whatever our engagement will be during the task force process of deliberating the approvals and access to marine offshore sand for mass nourishment. Lots of numbers, and I've also included a push-out table at the end to let you know, yes, there is a planning period of 10 years, normally for a CMP, but we have decided that the level of risk and the activity base that is going to come to the fore in our deliberations in the coming 18 months, that we've determined a 5-year window should adequately, in this particular CMP, cover the demands whilst the Newcastle CMP is developed and would come online as we anticipated somewhere after the due date of December 2021. But pictures often speak larger than words, so I'm trying, thank you, to give you a view of what that might look like indicatively in, say, the first year, 18 months of putting a certified plan on the ground. So the dotted yellow line represents the hazard line that we've adopted, which gives us the extent to which we need to see those first immediate buried structures put in place. So the Mitchell Street seawall is to the north. The Stockton Surf Life Saving Club is depicted to the south, both with nourishment, and in line with that will come, thank you, the first stage of an extension to those sea walls, the stage 1 minimal works, along with council's commitment to a terrestrial or other permissible source nourishment on the front of beach, as you can see. That to be followed by, thank you, the mass nourishment, which pushes that beach frontage out, as I identified earlier, to, let's say, around the 35 to 40 metre mark, and offers a protection as well as obviously an amenity outcome. And then the other associated works, thank you, Dan, that come with the dune restoration and obviously providing the access ways, etc., that the community would seek to be able to enjoy the amenity of Stockton Beach. So that's a very simplistic and indicative map. You will see similar, more detailed maps within the CMP in section 4, and they come from, I guess, an assessment across a plethora of information that I've tried to put into a digestible form for you. Thank you. It goes without saying then that the program of works that we're looking at should deliver the protection and amenity that the community's been calling for. It provides a series of activities where the City of Newcastle can demonstrate its commitment to coastal management in an effective and resilient way. And it will be blended and lifted and replaced by the broader Newcastle CMP, where we need to consider the northern section of the Stockton Beach at the same time as the rest of Newcastle's coastline. So to meet the Minister's current direction for the 30th of June, this is the engagement program through the exhibition process that's required. Clearly, we've been working not only with directly with members of the community liaison group, there's also a stakeholder and agency group which have been meeting regularly. And they have provided a wealth of information on how they see the program having been approached, and that's been incorporated in the proposition that we put in front of you this evening. The public exhibition will need to run for a 28-day period to meet the mandate of the Coastal Management Act. We are proposing that start tomorrow and run for that 28-day period till the 10th of June. During that time, the submissions will be brought together, and we will engage and involve community reference group and our stakeholders during that time to ensure that the document we bring back to Council for consideration on the 23rd of June as the draft final CMP can be endorsed, and then we can do what's required to send that forward to the Minister to meet the 30th of June deadline. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, KJ. I'll just hand that over to anyone if they want to ask any questions on the presentation.
Councillors, do you have any questions for Corrine or Joe or Councillor Church?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Can you tell us whether the Deputy Premier's task force has met yet, or whether there's a date for a meeting?
Thanks, Councillor Church. No, the Deputy Premier's task force hasn't met at this stage. I'm uncertain of the first meeting date, sorry.
Are there any other questions? Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. One of the questions that was raised in the community liaison group was the costings around the $80 a cubic metre for sand from local quarries. I wouldn't mind if you just sort of ran through in a bit of detail the rationale behind that figure.
Yes, certainly. Yes, you'll find if you look to your document attachment F, that there is a full treatise on the costing, how they were arrived, not only for the terrestrial, but for all of the other sand sources. I think, as I said to the CLG, the costings were based on our experience with trucking sand to Stockton from local quarries, both obviously in terms of commercial and confidence, but needless to say, the sand itself is not the cost centre that's of greatest, that forms the greatest part. It's actually picking up the sand and actually moving it to a stockpile and then relocating that stockpile on the beach to achieve a profile that actually delivers the intent of the nourishment process. And that they are the components that have actually been brought together to identify the unit rate for the sand on the beach. So as I say, it comes from not only the set of quotes we have from a range of suppliers, but also the transport costs. As you may have remembered, the campaign that we put in place in November, December last year has been an excellent basis from which to draw that number.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Corinne, I guess my question comes to the concern about climate change and factoring in climate change. We know that we're going to see more frequent events, that they're going to become more severe. And
correct.
Thinking about, you know, this is going to be an expensive exercise for.
Sorry, Carol, I can't hear you.
Sorry, is that better, Andrea?
No, it's. I don't know if anyone else is having problems, but I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Okay. Can anybody else hear me or not?
I can hear you, but you are quieter than usual, given the size of the microphone.
I know. It's just what comes with it. How's that?
Yeah, I'll get closer to my speaker.
Is that better?
Yeah. Do you have a headset, Andrea? Because
No,
sometimes, okay, that can be better for hearing if you've got headphones in.
Can council supply them for us? Because I don't have any.
I think so, yeah.
That'd be great if we could.
Okay. The short version of that question is, we know that we're going to see more severe events. We're going to see more severe events more often. Hypothetically, we start to replace the sand on the beach. We have an East Coast low that takes it all away. The next year we have another one. Maybe in the third year we have 2 events. How are we factoring in that ongoing management to ensure that at some point we are actually able to deliver that beach with the amenity that the residents in Stockton are asking us to try to find for them?
Yes. As I mentioned, the work of the consultants in the development of the sediment transport study and the risk and hazard assessment, again, that you will see the version of, pardon me, I'm just double checking, in attachment E, includes the issues of what is currently projected for climate change, particularly with respect to sea level rise in those future scenarios. So those hazard lines will go out to 2120. And the activities that we undertake, particularly mass nourishment, have incorporated the volumes of sand that would be required to meet those storm demands for those scenarios. So I think it's been included to the extent that the current planning guidelines indicate, but there's no doubt that when we come to look at protection in those scenarios, every beach of every coast, most coastal towns on the East Coast grappling with exactly the same thing, which is why the opportunity for mass nourishment here is so valued, and we're looking forward to it. I guess the other just definitive issue is that mass nourishment would include at least up to the scale of a 1 in 50 year event, and it will be the return interval. So what we'll need to watch, which is part of the re-nourishment process and the resilience of any strategy, is that re-nourishment will be obviously completely dependent on an effective monitoring program, which we again have costed into with the short and the long term for Stockton. Information is knowledge, and that's the powerful tool to be able to manage these wicked issues.
Thank you. Is there another question from Councillor Mackenzie? Yes.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. Just in one of the concerns I have in relation to this report is that the BCA pretty much rules out the feasibility of any kind of terrestrial-based sand sourcing. And as a consequence of that, a lot of our eggs are in the basket of the task force. We're proceeding on the assumption that the task force will make a series of recommendations that will enable marine sourcing of sand. What's our contingency plan should that task force not be able to deliver that outcome within that, well, what's estimated in our plan, I guess, of 12 months to 24 months? What's our alternative then in terms of sand sourcing or other mechanisms for addressing the shortage of sand?
So yes, you're quite correct. The terrestrial sourcing for mass nourishment is clearly a nonsense in terms of cost, volume. It's completely impractical. The sourcing of terrestrial sands, or more importantly, any other permissible sand source, is where we will be in the coming years. And that could be opportunities that are provided through projects. It might be, we've investigated the WestConnex tunnelling processes. There are other potential projects on the horizon, and the sand management guideline that we've developed will give us the capacity to be able to take advantage of those things. The volume of those opportunities is obviously an unknown, but what we do know is that if the sand management guideline is applied, that we will be able to quickly take advantage of those opportunities, and they may well present the sort of amenity volumes that will be far and away what we could bring on from terrestrial sources. That is, if in fact they are coming with the opportunity for sea-based delivery. And as I identified, a backup plan, as it is for most of the East Coast, is some form of last line of defence. I don't know whether you know, but of course Merewether has a buried seawall that runs the full length of the beach. It's only been exposed once that I've seen, and probably twice since it was built. And it is a rock buried A-line structure very similar to the North Coast, or to the Gold Coast rather. So they are options. And what we have identified is that there is a threshold under which we would need to start to consider whether those things might need to be put in place. And we need to be ready, like any emergency, to act with a consideration of a range of factors as to whether that they would need to be triggered. But I can assure you that I've heard nothing in my involvement in this process that the community is interested in taking on those constructed outcomes. And yes, we too, all of us, are going to look at the one thing that I think breaks through that issue on mass nourishment, which is the determination of a state government to bring on local government and the community to talk about how to access something which is currently not permissible, but we understand is both feasible. And if in fact we can hear in coming months or weeks that it's actually both acceptable and viable as a source, yeah, I'm very optimistic that we need to break that egg and start to make an omelette.
Thank you, councillors. I've got a question. I think the CEO has asked to ask a question, and I also have another question from Councillor Church.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. My question was to Joe. Joe, well, it's really a request, I guess. Could you just speak a little bit? KJ was talking a lot about the cost-benefit analysis, and specifically those options that have a positive or a 1.0 positive CBR. Can you talk about the likelihood of the government certifying a CMP that has a cost-benefit ratio of less than 1.0?
Yeah, I can talk to it a little bit. There's never been a CMP certified yet. So let's put that one out there. There has only ever been one CMP that has been submitted, and that, I believe, is Lake Illawarra, which is the combined CMP for Wollongong and Shoalhaven. That got submitted this week. So, but in saying that, it is really essential, because part of the new legislation meant that we had to undertake a CBA to form part of this coastal management program. Previously, under the previous legislation, the Coastal Protection Act, there wasn't such an onerous CBA inclusion in that component. So the need for us to actually have options that have a positive CBA is important to demonstrate that the options are a viable, doable thing. The other really important part of this is that the options that we select are actually supported by the community. So we are lucky that both of our options, both the 1B, the mass nourishment at 1.5 CBR, and then the hybridized option that gives us time, because obviously the 1B option, there's no other, we can't mitigate the other risks in the immediate future. With the the positive CBR means that we both get the community benefit, plus we're demonstrating that we've got an economically viable way forward. So, does that address your concern?
Thank you. Councillor Church?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I notice in the CMP it identifies a potential offshore source of sand near the southern breakwall. Is that near Nobby's headland, and is there enough sand there to do the job in the first couple of years?
The identification at the end of the Nobby's headland is marine sourced, which is currently an area that the Port of Newcastle dredge and bring material to the front of the Mitchell seawall or thereabouts and bottom dump it. So that is a 30,000 cubic metre commitment over the course of a year. So that is that source of sand. That's as much as they can bring through. There may be others. We're talking about out to 3 nautical miles when we talk about an offshore source. So we're talking about basically continental shelf sand. We're not talking about necessarily a source of the scale we need coming from the area immediately outside the harbour mouth.
There's a number of anecdotal stories that the reason we don't have enough sand on Stockton is because the breakwall captures it around Nobby's Beach, and that's where all the sand is that should be on Stockton Beach. Is that just local folklore, or is there some science in that?
I think if you have a look at the coastal engineering reports in the attachment, we have known for some time some of these sand sediment transport pathways, they become interesting once they hit north of the breakwall. And it's quite clear that the breakwalls themselves as structures actually deflect sand. So we already receive some of that sand through the dredging from the David Allen. And the clear indication here is that the amount of sand which is being lost out of particularly the compartments that are the subject of this CMP are so large that they can't be accommodated by our current activity, whether it's from the minimal dredging from the David Allen or from terrestrial sources. We're going to need to seek a sand source that's much larger than that. And I think, yes, I did mention that the New South Wales Geosurvey are doing that investigation on those continental shelf sources, and we're really looking forward to seeing the outcome of their investigations.
Thank you. Is there further questions from councillors? I know it's a very thorough and detailed report with a lot of attachments.
Let's speak.
I'm just making sure that councillors had an opportunity. Oh, Councillor Rufo.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I just couldn't get to the mute button. Just a general question, and not so much in relation to the report, but it's still to do with Stockton Beach. Is the beach is it closed entirely to the public for purposes of, say, going fishing or whatever, or is it allowed? Are people allowed on the beach? Or is the safety concerns to the extent where we don't want community members actually on the beach itself? If anyone could answer that for me, please.
From a risk perspective, there are access ways that are open around erosion, but I expect you're referring to the current social distancing issues.
Not so much.
No, okay.
Not
Right.
so much. I'm just talking in general. If a person, let's say we didn't have the social distancing in place, but we still had this issue with the beach and the erosion and so forth, are community allowed to go on the beach to go fishing as they would have in the past?
Yes, and yes, from my inspections and our officers' inspections, that's definitely going on. People are taking advantage of Stockton Beach. The issues around access and safety relate to the safety of the actual access ways. So there are a range of them which become too steep and too unstable after erosion events. And so we have a team which operate on a weekly basis, checking the safety of those access ways and closing and opening them as the beach moves. At the moment, most of them are open, not on Dalby Oval at this stage, but there's plenty of sand in. The last time I looked, which was a few days ago, you can access through even the stairways off the Mitchell Street seawall at the moment.
Okay.
The ones that are permanently shut would be the access way off Stone Street and the previous access way off Griffith Street. They're definitely closed.
Okay.
And Lexi's, obviously.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. It's just that I've had community members contact me to say, why can't we, should be allowed to still go on the beach? But thank you for your answer. I didn't have the answer for them. So thank you for the answer.
No worries.
Thank you, Councillor Rufo. Is there any other questions from councillors? If there are no other questions, I might wrap up the part of the agenda that includes the briefing. So can I have a motion to move back into ordinary? Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Luke. Thank you. All those in favour? All those against? I declare that motion carried. So we'll just move back into ordinary council and I'll grab a mover of the motion.
I'm happy to move that, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I grab a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Winnie Bartz. I can see a hand up, is that right? We have a motion before us, so obviously, would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor?
Yes, please, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, very happy to move the officer's recommendation to put the draft plan out on public exhibition. We've obviously had an exceptionally detailed presentation this evening. And I know I, like the community, will be spending some time over the coming days to digest all 500 pages of the coastal management plan that's been presented to us. And so I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation to put it out on public exhibition for 28 days. In doing so, I did just want to make reference of clearly the issues on Stockton Beach have been enormously challenging to us as an organisation and to the Stockton community, and have caused a great amount of unsettlement within the community, particularly over the recent East Coast low season and the impacts of erosion that we had earlier in the year. And I do want to commend council officers for the work that's been done in trying to address this, often in very trying and complicated circumstances. I think that the presentation we just received, the fact that it was summarised as a wicked problem is probably perfectly accurate, something that is exceptionally complicated, incomplete and contradictory and involving so many different parties. So the fact that we've been able to get to an outcome where we've got a plan out for public exhibition and comment that is supported by a range of stakeholders is a really impressive outcome from the city. I did also want to make mention, and apologies, some months ago, Councillor Mackenzie alerted me to this, and so he might wish to speak of it as well. The fact that we were a council that had been directed by the Minister to produce a plan before the 30th of June, and the first council to be required to do so before the 30th of June, is fairly significant. And something that we haven't talked about very much is the fact that that order actually came with a range of significant ramifications for the organisation. For example, if we weren't able to meet the direction of that order and have a plan submitted by the 30th of June, the ramifications listed in the Act include the suspension of the elected council. So the stakes are extremely high to ensure that we put out a plan on exhibition, that we are able to gain the public's feedback, and that we submit something that is workable to the government to be certified, so that we can go ahead with our partners and complete the necessary work. So very happy to move the officer's recommendation, and do wish to commend the officers. Thank you for producing something that we can put out on public exhibition and come back to council before the 30th of June for adoption.
Thank you. Is there any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I just want to reiterate the points raised by Councillor Clausen. And yeah, there are very serious consequences for us failing to meet the requirements under the ministerial directive. And I think at the time when this was first brought to our attention, I guess I raised the question of the extraordinary nature of the timeline, just how compressed so much work was going to have to be accomplished in order for us to meet a plan which was put out to a rigorous community consultation, as well as fulfilled the cost-benefit assessments and other assessments associated with the production of a workable CMP. It is an extraordinary achievement, there's no doubt about that. And Councillor Clausen has summarised just how significant it is to get to this point. We're still not over the line yet, and I think it's important to recognise that the community acceptance of the plan that's been outlined today is really going to be crucial for us to get it to that 30th of June deadline. In relation to that, I just wanted to extend my thanks and appreciation and draw Council's attention to the achievements of the Community Liaison Group, which I think had its 21st meeting last week. That's not an insignificant amount of meetings, given that they formed in February 2 years ago. That means that group of community members have been meeting almost monthly for the last 2 years. That's not counting personal meetings, it's not counting informal gatherings, it's not counting their role in reviewing very detailed scientific information, plans, programs. It's been an extraordinary commitment from that community liaison group, and for them to have remained staunch throughout, that they wanted beach amenity to be recognised as an asset that was going to be protected through this process. Never once did they waver from that position, and it's reflected very strongly and has given us, it's reflected very strongly in this proposal that we're putting out onto public exhibition, and has given us a superior CMP to what we would have had if not for that, the involvement of that liaison group. So I'm very grateful and very appreciative of all of the efforts of all members of that group. It's delivered us a superior plan, and one which is more likely to achieve community acceptance in the month ahead. That's not to say that that group is responsible for this plan, or that they, that it is their plan. It's still council's plan. We're still responsible for any flaws that it might still contain, and they still have every opportunity to make their assessment, as we will, of the validity and the feasibility of this plan. But given the time constraints, given the capacity of this plan to deliver on those goals and ambitions, I think this is an extraordinary achievement. I'm very happy to support it going out on public exhibition. I'm very much looking forward to hearing the community's views. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any further discussion, councillors? Just want to make sure that I'm not missing any discussion. I can't see any notes on the chat or hands in the air. Before we close this item, I would also I know at the top of the meeting, I did mention the huge body of work, and it's been mentioned by Councillor Mackenzie and Councillor Clausen. The Community Liaison Group has been integral to us actually getting to the point where we have a CMP that not only reflects their view, but is also based with the assistance of several different consultants over the last while, to actually make sure it is very sound in terms of not only the cost benefit analysis, but also the engineering behind it. And there was, throughout the process, many range of options that or paths that could have been gone down based on historic reports. But I think that some of the recent sand sediment studies and actually the analysis of the actual and the quantifying of the actual sand loss, which is in the order of 112,000 cubic metres every year, it's much more than previous studies had identified. And it's actually allowed us to now look at and have a very realistic cost-benefit analysis done on the options of actually returning sand to the beach, but also looking at some of the immediate risks that have come from severe erosion events. It is a place that we haven't been in before in terms of actually having a long-term plan for mass nourishment, which is something the community has wanted for some time. And I have to acknowledge the intervention of the Deputy Premier early this year in the acknowledgement of the New South Wales Government's very important role in this process, and also the process of assisting with a solution that isn't currently allowable in New South Wales. And the task force that is being formed is a very crucial part of the solution. And I believe it'll be a crucial part of many solutions for other coastal areas in New South Wales. And the work that that task force will do will hopefully assist us in the near future of identifying a viable offshore source for mass nourishment. But in the meantime, the work that's identified in this plan is significant. It's $19 million over the first 5 years, and a $21 million mass nourishment campaign. So even going back to reports before I was on council, they were always looking, any intervention was always around the $30 or $40 million mark. And at the end of the day, this plan is no different. And a lot of the solutions that have been proposed in the past and not been enacted on in plans or legislation have either not been viable, not been fully tested, or quite cost prohibitive. So to actually have the hybrid solution that's been worked through with the community in line with their wishes in a very scientific manner, with a very engineering focus, but also with community wishes around beach amenity and no more loss of community land and the protection of not just public assets, but also private assets that are in some of the hazard lines that you can see in the report, is really is a solution to what is well described as a very wicked problem for our city. So I again have to reiterate the huge amount of work that has gone into this draft document from volunteers in our community group, but also our staff members, combined with the consultants, as well as DPI and New South Wales government agencies, right up to the Deputy Premier's office, who I know is working on the terms of reference at the moment for the task force, and has been doing and has had their geoscience department doing a desktop analysis of all the information around offshore nourishment that is currently at hand. And I'm expecting that that task force will hopefully move as rapidly as we need it to over the coming 12 months to actually feed into the Newcastle CMP that very specific solution around mass nourishment for our city. But it is as the Deputy Lord Mayor and Councillor Mackenzie highlighted, it's a big ask on the City of Newcastle, only on the 17th of February to be asked to expedite this plan by 6 months. We were already 12 months ahead, and we're on track to deliver by the end of this year. But to have this plan expedited and completed by the 30th of June this year is an enormous body of work. And we are also in very uncertain times and deemed an essential project. And I know, because I've been quite intimately involved, how hard, particularly in the last couple of months, the staff have worked on this document. So I can't reiterate my thanks enough, because it's been many hours of many days. But the community has been at the centre of this plan and have been exceptional in their time and frank and fearless advice to council. And whenever councils put the community at the centre of solving wicked problems, I'm confident that you will get a good solution. And the task force is a way of aligning not only government agencies but also levels of government towards a solution that is costly but very, very important solution. I'll hand back over to Councillor Clausen.
Lord Mayor, just in conclusion, I can't say anything much further than what you just did in terms of the thanks to staff, the thanks to the community and the community liaison group for all of the work and the numerous meetings. I understand some just in the last few days to consider this draft plan prior to it being presented to us. It is greatly appreciated. Fingers crossed that the next stage of the planning process goes well, that there are lots of submissions and people in Stockton in particular take the opportunity of the public exhibition to review this plan, that we're able to consider an updated version by the council in June before it's been submitted for sign-off by the New South Wales government. And hopefully that also means some state funding is forthcoming to deliver on this plan as well.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Are there any votes against? There are no votes against, so I declare that motion carried unanimously. Thank you very much, councillors, and also thank you to the staff for the briefing and the presentation. That concludes the extraordinary meeting for this evening, councillors. I note that we are following on this evening with a number of workshops, so I will end the meeting